I posted one yesterday about a guy trying to break in, but then remembered something way worse that happened in Venezuela during a research project there. I study conflict zones, so I was in a no-go area in western Venezuela, and I lived there for just over a month. Because of the embargo, there are major food shortages, so I'd have to make the trip to town from my rural house every day to buy food, because in Venezuela, you only buy what you absolutely need in one go, because everyone needs food for that day, not just you. Now, one of the major rules is, don't get a taxi except from a taxi stand. So I was walking around looking for one because my usual one is closed and I get lost. This was my first week there and I'm lost in San freaking Cristobal, land of ransom kidnappings of Westerners. Mind you, I have red hair and very pale skin and clearly am not Venezuelan. So when I see a taxi, I hail it and jump in the thing. It's only once it gets going that I realize the entire interior of the passenger door is stripped. No handle, no window crank, no nothing. Proper Bundy style. Well, I went to see Bundy's car at NAMC in DC. Then he stops and picks up two other dudes and drives in totally the wrong direction. And I start swearing in Spanish and demanding him to take me home. He ignored me, but eventually pulled into a side alley. All I can think about is these ransom Westerners and how my mother can't pay a ransom and that my university made it clear before I left on my fellowship that they wouldn't. So I very slowly raise one side of my skirt and show them the 8-inch buck knife that I have strapped to my leg. I say, I have 3 more of these and a gun, which was a lie, and 6 years of Krav Maga martial arts. I told them that I was MI6 and that my government would come for me, which was also a lie, and I repeat calmly that it would be a very good idea on his part to take me home. He took a deep breath, slowly put the car in gear, and complied. And never have I been so glad that my traditional Venezuelan house had bars on all the windows. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with at that time one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home. This night, however, she ended up staying at our place, heading to bed early. I was a server at that time, so I stayed up pretty late, usually watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact that my neighbors tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give you some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple living in a smaller mill house, and they were constantly coming to our door asking for handouts. Now, normally, I'd be happy to help a neighbor out, but they would come over and ask for crazy shit, like for us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs got shut off. Sometimes beer, and once, literally to ask for $1. They would consistently be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door peephole to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was, smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch, when I hear a knock at the door. I rolled my eye because I know exactly who came knocking, and it's 11 p.m. I checked the peephole, and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally, I just walk away and continue with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. I just wanted to come over and see if you would fill my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring, here in my pocket. I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me." Baffled but curious, I told him congrats and said that I'd be out in a second. I just needed to put shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Quickly, I ran to the back room that looked out into their backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No sign of decorations or anything like that. And naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Yeah, fuck that," she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend started banging on the door. I looked through the peephole again, and I couldn't see anything. I was so confused all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the peephole. I quickly turned around and put my back up against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and sat up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure that we were overreacting. We went out our back door and hopped into her car so we could do a drive-by. They always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see in their house. Slowly, we crept by in her car and peered into their living room. Sitting on the couch and all staring at the wall, they looked strung out, was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again, and one day, I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me as I got out of my car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her I hadn't seen them for a while, and she informed me that she was the owner. She told me that they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed, needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall, and literal shit on the floor. I told her that I was sorry to hear that she had to deal all of that, but I was happy that they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad that I didn't follow him to the backyard.
I grew up in a big house that was on the corner of a quiet street, right in front of a 5-star retirement home. On the other side of the street, in between all the big, beautiful houses, was a small, old house with wood covering all the windows. If you didn't live on my street, you'd probably think nobody lived in that sketchy little house. Throughout the day, random cars would pull into the back of the house where they could be seen, and I'd see men walk in and out of the house. Sometimes men would sit on the front porch and drink and smoke. Around 9:30 p.m. each evening, the nurse or caregiver shifts would change in the retirement home. In front of my house was a bus stop where all the employees would wait for the bus or their rides. It was approximately 10 p.m. on a warm night in June. I was in my basement and I had the windows cracked open. I was at home with my mom and 3 sisters when I heard screaming from outside. My sisters heard it as well. We looked outside the windows, but it was too dark to really see anything clearly. We saw a woman running around 3 cars in our driveway, and we assumed someone was breaking into our cars. So we turned on the outside light and spotted a woman screaming, "Help me!" and running around the cars. She was being chased by 2 men. We got scared and ran inside to our mom. My sisters and I were young teens at the time and too scared to go outside by ourselves. The screaming continued for a few minutes until I saw the man grab the woman and try to push her into the trunk of their SUV. She was trying her hardest to fight back and resist. At that exact moment, my dad was arriving home and noticed a black Jeep and its trunk open, blocking the street. He flashed his lights and honked at them, not knowing what was going on at all. The kidnappers thought someone had spotted them, and they immediately threw the woman on the ground, got in a car, and drove off. My dad parked his car and found the woman on the ground. She was crying, and she kept thanking my dad. As my dad had connected the dots and realized that he had stopped her from getting thrown into a van, he looked around and saw a few men standing outside the sketchy house, and realized they were watching the whole kidnapping happen without interfering at all. He invited the woman into our house and called the police. She was a 55-year-old nurse, and she told us she waits outside of our home for her son to pick her up every single day. She was thankful for my dad. When the police took our statements and gathered the kidnappers' fingerprints from our cars, since they were running around our cars and touching them as they ran, my dad told the police he suspected the men from the sketchy house across the street. He thinks they may have been involved. After the cops left that night, a man walked over to our house and told my dad, "You made a mistake by saying something to the police." Since that day, anytime I went outside to play, they'd be staring at me, and if I walked home from school, they'd begin to walk after me. They were incredibly creepy and scary. Eventually, the cops busted their house for a bunch of illegal activity. They drilled the doors shut, and I never saw anyone ever go in that house again. I did see the 55-year-old nurse sometimes as she got off work. She now works earlier in the day. She always waves at us as she walks by.
Hi. Before I start, I'd like to give a couple details about me. At the time of this story, I just finished my 6th grade year and I was very athletic. I took runs every day. This encounter occurred in the summer. And what comes with summer? Heat. So instead of running in the day when it was hotter, I began running in the evening when the sun was down. On the day of the encounter, I followed my normal routine. I told my mom I was going to start my run, and then began to listen to my music on my iPod Shuffle. Now, the way my neighborhood works is that there is only one entrance, which doubles as the only exit as well. I live in a suburban area, so the main road that passes the entrance on my neighborhood isn't very busy, but it isn't empty either. On that day, I was running down the main road of my neighborhood that all the small streets branch off. I was close to the entrance and could clearly see all the cars passing by. And I am also clearly visible to all cars passing by. I remember watching this gray Honda car slam on its brake at the entrance on my neighborhood. This was done so fast and so hard that I heard the tires squeal over the song that I was listening to at full volume. I brushed it off as someone following directions that most likely nearly missed my neighborhood's entrance. The car then began up the road that I was running on, going extremely slow, at least 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. I could make out 3 shadows in the car through the darkness and little light from the house porch lights. 2 at the front of the car and someone in the back seat. As I passed the car, I saw the driver's side windows was down. I gave the car a smile and a wave, and I turned down a small street that branched off the road that I was running on. Now, I remember feeling extremely on edge, so I checked over my shoulder. I saw the car turn around in the middle of the road and then slowly turn down the street I was running on. Again, I chalked it up to misinterpreting directions and tried not to think much of it. But I really began to freak out. As a girl of my age, I always would jump to the worst possible outcome. I wasn't very tall and only stood at about 5'2". So I knew that I could easily be manhandled if the people in the car had any ill intentions. But I knew that was very unlikely, so I tried to tell myself to calm down. I reached the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, so I was now running on the opposite side of the car. They were still going very slow, and what I do next may have saved my life, and I can't imagine what would have happened to me if I didn't. As the car and I were about to be right next to each other, I paused my music but kept my earbuds in, giving the illusion that I was listening. As the car and I got closer, I heard the two men speaking. One of them actually tried to speak to me, yelling hey or something like that, but I didn't reply because I knew that it would blow my cover and that they would know that I was able to hear them. As the car drove a little bit behind me and out of my view, I heard one of them say, "We'll get her when we turn back around." I froze. Get me? I feel like something dumped a bucket of freezing water on my head. I knew they had to go around the cul-de-sac still, so I did the only thing I could think of. I sprinted. As I ran down the street, I looked over my shoulder and saw the car had definitely went around the cul-de-sac and was now going a lot faster after me. I turned into the main road of my neighborhood and ran. I passed my street and just ran as fast as I could towards the end of my neighborhood. My house was the first one on my street, so I knew they would see where I lived if I tried to go home. I was scared to death, and I was running for my life. I had no idea what I could do to get away from these people, so I just pushed my body to go as fast as possible. I continued to check over my shoulder, hoping maybe they wouldn't be there. But they were. They were right behind me, and I distinctly remember they were silent. I had imagined them yelling at each other that I was going to get away, but they were chasing me in silence. To me, that was creepier than if they were to be yelling. When I ran down the last street in my neighborhood, I started running through backyards. That was the only thing I had left to do. I heard the car slam on its brakes, turn off its engine, and 3 doors slam. My heartbeat sped up. I was so convinced that they were going to begin chasing after me through the backyards. "Get back in the car. We won't find her like this." My heart dropped as I heard 3 doors shut and the car engine start up again. Now that I was running through backyards, I would have to run across the streets too. This was the scariest part for me because I would be very visible to the people in the car if they were to be driving down the main road. I remember staring at the street, trying to decide whether or not I should try to wait it out or if I should just book it home. Well, I went with book it home. I didn't even check my shoulder as I ran through backyards, jumped over fences, and ran across the streets. I was just waiting for car lights to light up in the area around me or for arms to wrap around me. But it never happened. Somehow, the car must have turned down the wrong streets or completely missed me, and I truly believe that that is the luckiest thing that has ever happened to me. When I got to my house, I wasted no time jumping through the door. Once I slammed my door shut, I sat on the ground and thought about what just happened and what could have happened. I never ended up telling my parents until years later, or even calling the police. But if they are still out there, I hope they're locked up somewhere so they can never terrorize a child again. I can't imagine what they would have done to me if they ever caught me. Needless to say, let's never meet ever again.
Before I tell the story, I would like to give some short context so you can understand the situation better. I live in America Latina, and at the time this happened, there was a lapse of time where lots of children were kidnapped at the markets and malls and places like that. So, take that into account so you can understand this better. I was 5, maybe 6 years old when I went to the supermarket with my grandpa. We went alone, and he has always been a very relaxed man. We were buying, and then he told me to stay with the shopping cart. He's been trying to look for something for a while, and he'll be right back. So I just stayed there. I must clarify that I've always been a distrustful girl. After a moment, I saw a tall man carrying a little girl, which didn't look like his daughter or anything. I didn't know the reason, but something in the scene just looked out of place to me. After seeing that, I just felt awkward and held tighter to the cart. He looked at me, and something inside me told me that something was just not okay. so I just walked away, very slowly towards my grandfather, who was just a few meters away from where I was. While the man was walking to me, giving me his hand, in that moment I just said, "Grandpa," and the man ran away. After thinking about this, it disturbs me. It really bothers me because it was probably some sort of trafficking thing. If my grandfather didn't happen to be close enough, who knows what would have happened to me? I could be one of those faces on the sides of the milk carton.
So when I was 7 to 8, my parents took me to a Christmas market that had tons of activities for kids. I didn't know this at that time, but my parents were fighting and thus preoccupied and just mostly left me on my own. The way it worked was you bought some vouchers at the door and could then go inside and use one voucher for one activity. There were stuff like baking cookies, painting stuff, and wood burning for older kids and many more. It was pretty fantastic. Some of the stuff had queues if there was a lot of interest. Now, I'd gotten about 10 vouchers. An activity is about 15 minutes, and my parents were in a cafe in the building but well out of sight, since it was an area that you could only get into if you accompanied a kid or were a kid. I guess they felt safe leaving me alone. This was allowed, but not encouraged. Anyway, I was queuing for my favorite activity there, the fabric painting section, where you got a piece of linen and could draw Christmas patterns and stuff on it. It was already my third time, but whatever, right? I had to queue, and when I was about halfway to the entrance, someone grabbed my arm. I panicked immediately because my parents would never have touched me like that, and I knew nobody else there. I yelped and tried to pull away, but I couldn't. Turning, I saw it was an older lady, maybe 40s to 50s, I'm not sure. She was well dressed, looked pretty strict but normal. Anyway, she was pulling me out of the queue against my will. I tried to yell and ask her to let go of me, but she said something like, "You always do this! Come on, Marie!" My name is not Marie, not even close, and I yelled as much, still thinking that she just confused me for someone else. I was a pretty average-looking girl with a brunette ponytail, nothing particularly special, nor were my clothes. She looked down at me again, scoffed and told me to stop throwing a tantrum and that we were going home. It was at that exact moment that I realized that if I didn't escape, she would take me away. So I just basically opened my mouth and screamed at the top of my lungs. Not words, just a screech. And before that, I'd mostly asked to be released and many more. Loud, but not full-on screaming. I was kind of a polite kid. She paused mid-step because clearly I'd startled her, but she didn't let go yet. So I just screamed about the only thing that I could really make sense of. "My name is Sam!" This was the first time that people actually looked at us more than a mom or a grandma and a kid in a tantrum, because I'm clearly too old to not know my name and also visibly scared. I was still trying to pull away, but she had a grip on my forearm like a vice. I made eye contact with the first random person I saw looking over. A guy, early 30s I guess, but definitely younger than her. I just pled for him to help me, and he actually came over at that point. We were in the side of the exit, and she dragged me quite far, and I guess at that point, she decided it was too much of a hassle and let me go. And since I'd been fighting her, I immediately slammed onto the ground, which actually prompted more people to step up to help me. I was sobbing, and as soon as I could get to my feet, I ran the other way to my parents. I must have barreled into 10 or more people and kids on the way to where I knew my parents were. It was a cafe like I said, and they were in the middle. My mom had super recognizable fake red hair, so even while sobbing, I could see her easily. I banged into a table and knocked off stuff and just threw myself at my mother. I was in no state to explain, and she was both mad at me for making a scene and really fucking worried because I was not the type to cause a disturbance pretty much ever. I wanted to explain, but I just couldn't. There was a bit of a commotion around, with people being nosy. But as I calmed down, I realized that the guy that I had begged for help was explaining to my parents what had happened. I hadn't even noticed him come with me, but I kind of tuned in when he kept asking if my grandma was here or something. Well, she's not even in the same country, it's just me and my parents, and he was also asking if I could have known her. Obviously, my mother confirmed that that was not the case and asked if what he told her was right. He'd confirmed that some woman was dragging me off calling me Marie. My parents and the guy, and also his son, who was fair few years older than me, maybe 15 or so, went with me to the security, where I tried and failed to describe the lady. The guy had a much better description of her, but she was obviously long gone. I think they called police, but I never spoke to any cops that I can remember. I felt awkward and sorry that I ruined the other kid's day there, so I gave him the rest of my vouchers so he could do more stuff if he wanted. He was really nice and he gave me a pack of cookies that he baked to eat while the adults were talking. I don't remember any of their names or anything, but I remember how grateful I was to the kid. More so than his dad even. It just really comforted me that I had another kid around who was nice. Anyway, my parents took me home ASAP, of course, and we never went to that place again. There was a short story in the newspaper the next day about a kidnapping scare, and my mother told me some years later. But it was all just a speculation, and they didn't even confirm in the paper if it was an attempt or just a misunderstanding. Well, it sure as shit wasn't a misunderstanding, and they never caught the lady or did any follow-ups as far as I'm aware. I actually had bruises on my arm where she gripped me through my sweater, and I still don't like Christmas markets much. In 2015, I was living in East Hollywood and working at a creative marketing agency as a project coordinator. The pressure of having to provide for my 1-year-old son and his mother, combined with the grinding hours and travel of my job, had begun to consume me. It felt as though the city were eating me from the inside out. And one late afternoon after work, standing in our bathroom, my chest began to cave in with pain. My girlfriend called 911 and an ambulance took me to the hospital. I was in the emergency room for the rest of the evening and into the night as they administered IV Ativan and I calmed down. Around 11:30 p.m., I was discharged. I called my girlfriend from the admissions desk, who had just gotten our son to go to sleep, which at times was a monumental task as he was abnormally colic in his first year. I told her that I would take an Uber, not realizing that I didn't have my phone or any other personal belongings. Dazed and confused from the Ativan, I stumbled out onto Sunset Boulevard and started walking west toward my apartment, which was about 1.5 miles from the hospital. As I was walking, a small early 90s model hatchback slowed to a crawl and began driving alongside me. The driver said something, but I couldn't make out any words. The effects of the Ativan had drastically reduced my inhibitions, and I approached the car to hear what this stranger was trying to ask me. He said my name, Are you Max? You're Max. He had a thick Asian accent. Your name is Max? Matt? I treated you in the hospital. I helped you. You get in. It's okay. He leaned over the center console and opened the door. I remember thinking that I had never seen this person before, but he knew my name. He knew I had just left the hospital, and he was wearing scrubs. Additionally, this man was small and frail, and he didn't feel like a threat. And against what normally would have been my better judgment, I got into the passenger seat. Almost immediately, I regretted my decision to enter the vehicle. It was unkempt, not the car of a doctor certainly. There were empty prescription bottles and takeout containers strewn about the floor of the car, and the ashtray was so stuffed with cigarette butts that the majority of them had fallen out onto the floors and in between the cracks and crevices of the gear shifter. I noticed he was driving slower than he should have been, at least 10 miles per hour under the speed limit. And suddenly, reality hit me. I was in an old, disgusting car with a strange man that I didn't know in the middle of the night, driving down a seemingly empty Sunset Boulevard in the middle of East Hollywood. With the sudden alarm bells going off inside my mind, I asked him to stop the car. I lived right around the corner, so I told him that I would like to get some fresh air before I got home for the night. The strange small man didn't pull over. Sensing my fear, he reached over and placed his hand on the inside of my thigh, smiling. It's okay. You are here now. No one can help you. You help yourself now. You help me. I tried to rationalize this strange statement. English clearly isn't his first language, and this is Hollywood. This man sees young, desperate people every day, working the streets. Manipulative, gross, and creepy? Yes. Dangerous? I'm not about to find out. By this time, the Ativan was no match for my fear and adrenaline, and by instinct, I grabbed his wrist and threw it back at him. I ain't a fucking trick. You touch me again, I'll touch you. Pull the fucking car over now. As the car began to slow to a crawl, I thought about jumping out. I must have had my fingers wrapped around the door latch because just then, I realized the door wouldn't open. And just as I was about to turn and demand again to be let out of this man's car, I realized something was seriously wrong. When I turned my head to look at him, it felt as though I was experiencing déjà vu, like I had already turned my head, but I was in some sort of time loop. Suddenly, I'm staring down at myself from the outside and above the car. I could see everything. There I was, fully reclined in the passenger seat of this car as we fly down Sunset, eyes wide open with pupils the size of marbles. It was the scariest thing that I have ever experienced in my life. I don't know if what I was seeing was fact or imagination, but my abductor had one hand on the wheel and the other seemed to be going through my left pocket as if he was frantically looking for something. I don't know how to explain the rest of this experience, but I have strong memories of coming back to reality under the fluorescent lighting of a gas station, finding myself staring at the door latch and unable to move. The next thing I know, I'm walking into a convenience store looking for a phone. I felt like a train had hit me, and remember being so confused and embarrassed that I couldn't even articulate what had just happened. I didn't know if 15 minutes had passed since I got into this man's car, or maybe 6 hours. I don't even know if anything happened at all. Maybe I was in the middle of a psychotic break. As the sun came up, I realized that I was on the Sunset Strip. I remember looking down at the hospital band, and I remembered about the panic attack, the emergency room, and I remember the emergency doctor who treated me so kindly, and I remember the woman who helped me call my girlfriend before I left. And I remember that small, frail Asian man who wore scrubs and called me by my name, who so selflessly offered me a ride home. I don't remember ever telling him where I lived, and he never asked. This event took place quite a few years ago, so unfortunately, I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember nearly all of it. Anyways, this happened when I was 4 to 5 years old and on an Easter Sunday. My family always gathers at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays, birthdays, and many more, so as we do every single holiday. My mother and I started our hour-long trip to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all the city commotion, which explains the long drive we had. We were probably around 20 minutes away from our destination when my mom noticed that we were a little low on gas. So we pulled into this old, almost rustic-looking gas station with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white, with a few festive decorations outside and lots of Easter stickers on the 2 large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mom, having taught me not to talk to strangers nor open the car doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone as she went inside to briefly pay for the gas. She told me that she would be right back before going into the gas station. It felt nice that day, so the windows in the car were down so we could feel the breeze while driving instead of using the AC. While I was waiting on my mom, I remembered adjusting the colorful paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out of the backseat window. When I looked over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 or 40 years old, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying. At this moment, I remembered that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that, "My mom says I shouldn't speak to strangers." He then replied with, "Well, we can be friends then. My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger, huh?" At that time, I thought that he was right. In my mind, I thought, since a stranger is someone you don't know, this man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew his name. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember, and all I remember is him telling me that I had a nice Easter basket. At this point, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but being a child, of course, I didn't know why. My mom then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thinks he's doing. The man seems to panic and he pulls my door handle violently. He quickly realized that it was locked, thankfully, and proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of my wrists and attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull against him on instinct, and this caused him to let go and take off running. My mom quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the doors. She grabbed me and pulled me into an almost painful bear hug, then inspected me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a slight bruise or redness on my arm, where he grabbed me, but other than that, I was just shaken up. The reality of what had just happened set in at this moment, and I remember just crying and holding on to my mom right after I said that I was okay. I don't remember anything after this point, but I recently asked my mom about it, and she said that she called the police immediately after. And to this day, my mom still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life, and claims that if she had gotten there any later and came back to an empty car, she wouldn't have been able to live with herself. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Ralph, Tasha, Fire05, Gabriel, Eskimono, Silver Threads, Sevenfold, Moschino. Thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. Instagram and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.